Hello, and welcome to Unit 6, Reproduction, Human Reproduction, Day 2. And this is where the numbering gets a little confusing because we've moved from male reproduction now to female reproductive system, Day 1. So there will be 4 days where we talk about the female reproductive system because it can get a little complicated. But today, our first day is the easiest one. So let's go ahead and get started. How does the anatomy of the female reproductive system allow for reproduction? So this will look a bit like what we did yesterday or last week, I think actually is how the timing works out. But we're looking at how does the female reproductive system anatomy allow for reproduction? So we will be labeling a diagram of female reproductive system anatomy. So let's go ahead and get started. This is a little reminder from yesterday's handout, so let's go ahead and track the pathway for sperm from the point of production to ejaculation, be specific with anatomy. So we have the place where the sperm are created, the testes, then to the tube that transports the sperm from the testes, the vas deferens, which remember that vas is what's snipped in a vasectomy, right? The vas deferens is snipped. Then we go from the vas deferens to the seminal vesicles, where the semen that is created in the prostate is mixed with the sperm to provide a liquid suspension for those gametes. And then finally, the point at which the sperm is released into the world through the urethra, right? And that's the same tube that your urine is released through. Males and females both have a urethra, but in males, it has this dual function of not only being a part of the excretory system, but also the reproductive system and the pathway for sperm. Created in the testes, transported from the testes through that to the vas deferens to make its way into the seminal vesicles, where it is mixed with the seminal fluid to become the semen or ejaculate that will be released from the urethra. And let's go ahead and draw a little sperm cell. And we remember that they're gametes, so they have 23 chromosomes, which is half the species number of humans, 46. So question number 2, how are the testes and testosterone related? Testes, testosterone. So hopefully we remember that testosterone is the male sex hormone produced in the testes. And we talked a little bit about that during the endocrine system, because remember, the testes are not only a part of the reproductive system, but they also function as a gland in the endocrine system, producing testosterone, the hormone that helps regulate sperm production and also the development of secondary sex characteristics in men, like facial hair, the deepening of the voice, and muscle development in the body. All right, so now this part A, is the female introduction hypothesis. So this part, I have answers for this, but I would like you to go ahead and make your hypothesis, and then we will go back and revisit this part at the end of the video. So at what age can females no longer become pregnant? At what age can males no longer father children? And why do the probability of birth defects increase with maternal age beginning at about 35? So go ahead and answer those questions based upon what you think. So this is your hypothesis based on your prior knowledge. We talked about these topics a little bit, but we'll go back and revisit that at the end. So you can write anything you want, whatever you think there, but I will go ahead and give you some more specific information at the end. So, okay. Part B. female reproductive system reading. It's a long one. Each month, the female reproductive system prepares for a possible pregnancy by producing a mature egg cell, the female gamete. So eggs are the female gamete, and this is a monthly cycle that is referred to as the female reproductive cycle, and menstruation is just one part of that cycle. And we'll get a lot more specific about that cycle in the coming days, but this is just our introductory reading. The mature egg cell is called an ovum. And remember, so the ovaries are the glands that produce estrogen and other female hormones. And anytime you see that ov, we're talking about eggs. So the mature egg cell is an ovum. If the ovum is fertilized by a sperm cell, and if the fertilized ovum implants in the uterus, a pregnancy will begin. And what is that fertilized ovum? Well, that's a zygote, of course, but the creation of the zygote isn't the only part that is required for a pregnancy to actually happen, right? That fertilized egg needs to implant itself in the wall of the uterus. And the uterus, you can see down here, we will label shortly, but that's where the baby grows. The fertilized egg will be fed and protected through 9 months of development. The main function of the female reproductive system is to produce ova. In addition, the female reproductive system prepares the female's body to nourish a developing embryo. And this is why the female reproductive system is quite a bit more complicated than males, right? They just need to produce and transfer gametes, but then the female reproductive system also has to produce gametes, but then it has to nourish a developing embryo. Big job. Thank your moms. All right, egg production. 2 ovaries are found within the female's abdomen. The ovaries produce egg cells. And then again, you see that ov produces the ova. We're talking about eggs. Ovaries also secrete estrogen and progesterone, the female sex hormones. The ovaries of a newborn female contain about 2 million immature eggs. Holy crow. Egg cells have 23 chromosomes, the haploid number N, because eggs, like sperm, are formed through meiosis, right? So they're haploid cells with 23 chromosomes, half the species number for humans. This process begins in the egg cells of a female before she is born. But it becomes stalled. So it begins before she is born. Think back to this question. But it becomes stalled in the prophase of the first meiotic division. When a female reaches puberty, the levels of sex hormones rise. This event allows meiosis to start again. However, only one egg cell completes development each month inside one of the adult female's ovaries. The eggs path, sorry. So meiosis in females is much more complicated. So in males, there is the body cell that is used as a template that is in the testes, right? So this is a body cell. This has 46 chromosomes, then goes through meiosis 1, producing 2, meiosis 1 being really just like mitosis, producing 2 clones of itself. Then in meiosis 2, the second division, we have the 2 haploid sperm cells produced from each body cell. And this is a process that occurs very quickly. Ooh, sorry, my sperm cells really are starting to look like bad tadpoles down there. So this is a process that happens very, very frequently in males and results in millions of sperm cells being produced every day. In females, this is very, very different. So in females, 2 million eggs are inside of the female's ovaries when she's in the womb. Wow, right? Males do not have sperm in their testes when they're in the womb. This is different. This is a difference in the development of the embryo. So the little baby female has all of her 2 million eggs, but they're just chilling. They're not done becoming mature eggs. And they won't be done becoming mature eggs until it's their time to shine. So each month, only one mature egg is produced. Only one mature egg finishes meiosis. And all of the other products of meiosis, right, there are still 4 cells produced, are called polar bodies. And we will look at that in more detail, but this might help you again answer this question. So, okay. In contrast to the male's reproductive system, which produces millions of gametes each day, the female reproductive system produces 1 viable egg each month. Although a female is born with about 2 million eggs in her ovaries, only 300 to 400 egg cells will mature in her lifetime. So 1 each month during ovulation. When an egg cell matures, it is called an ovum. An ovum is about 75,000 times larger than a sperm cell and can be seen with the unaided eye. After an ovum is released from an ovary, cilia sweep the ovum into the fallopian tube. The fallopian smooth muscles lining the fallopian tube move the ovum down the tube towards the uterus. So brushing the ovum down towards the uterus to help facilitate implantation. An ovum's journey through a fallopian tube usually takes 3 to 4 days to complete. Oh boy. If sperm are present in the fallopian tube during this time, the ovum may become fertilized. So this period of ovulation takes about 3 to 4 days. That mature egg matures inside of the ovary, is released into the fallopian tube. It gets swept inside of there, and then it's waiting in the fallopian tube for fertilization. Waiting, 3 to 4 days pass. It completes its journey down the fallopian tube, and the smooth muscle carries it down into the uterus. If during that time period there were sperm present, it may become fertilized, and then it would become, hopefully, if nothing went wrong, implanted into the uterine wall, resulting in a pregnancy. But if that doesn't happen, then the egg is released along with the uterine lining in menstruation, which again, this is just the intro. We're going to talk about this a lot more specifically over the next few days, but start thinking about what you know about your own body, what you have heard about this before. Some of these things are probably clicking. So what is an ovum? It is a mature egg cell. What are the major roles of the female reproductive system? To produce ova and to prepare the female's body to nourish a developing embryo. I'm being very gender typical here and writing everything in pink. Sorry, but I like the color coding. Okay, so 1, to produce ova, female gametes. And 2, to prepare the body to nourish a developing embryo. How are the male and female gametes alike and different? Well, they're both haploid. Both are haploid cells, but sperm are produced in much higher numbers. But the key difference here is that the egg cell looking back in the text is 75,000 times larger than the sperm cell. And that is why the actual zygote is a fertilized egg. The sperm cell merges its nucleus with the egg cell during fertilization, and then the body of the egg cell, that much larger body, is what actually nourishes the initial zygote before it begins to divide and become an embryo. Let's make that a little neater. The egg cell is 75,000 times larger than a sperm cell, and it can be seen with the naked eye. How long are viable sperm present in the female reproductive tract? About 3 to 4 days. So this means, for your own purposes, because we're talking about human reproduction here, you ovulate during a period of about 3 days. So if you engage in unprotected sex anytime during that window, 3 to 4 days, the sperm cells could fertilize that egg on either side of that window, meaning there is about a 7 days window, like 3 to 4 days on either side, where you could result in an unintended pregnancy. Use protection, kids. Don't have sex, but then if that's what you're going to do anyway, use protection, because that can happen unintentionally, right? But it can also be very difficult to have a pregnancy, especially if you're a little bit older. Taking a look at that question. So now let's label the female reproductive anatomy. All right. So we have here first the site of fertilization right up here at the top that have these cilia to sweep the eggs into the fallopian tubes. So you can see there's one on either side. This kind of looks like a goat skull, right? Female reproductive system anatomy has that goat skull shape. That's because all women are Satanists. No, that's just a joke. But these are the fallopian tubes. That is the site of fertilization. Two L's in fallopian. Let's double check. Yes. They have two major functions: the site of fertilization and to carry or sweep ova into reproductive tract. Right, so next, the place where eggs are both produced and mature, there's one on either side here, the ovaries. And they look a bit like perhaps the testes, and they serve a similar function. So the ovaries, just like the testes, perform a dual role. Not only do they produce the female gametes, they also serve as a gland in the endocrine system, producing estrogen and progesterone, the female hormones. Oh, wow, the injustice. All right. And you can see there's one on either side. And so there is a fallopian tube on either side. And what happens during ovulation, so when a mature egg is released, so hold on, let's draw a little eggy in here. So a little eggy. And there are follicles in here. We're going to talk more about that in the coming days. But one of the follicles has an egg cell mature. And when that egg cell matures, it bursts out of the ovary and it is swept into the fallopian tube. And the muscular fallopian tube carries it up closer to the uterus where it's kind of just hanging out, seeing if any sperm are going to come by this month. Only one ovary typically ovulates at a time, and they don't necessarily like alternate 1 month right, the other month left, but your two different ovaries will ovulate at different times. So only one per month, only one egg is released per month, and this is called ovulation. And then if no sperm are present in the reproductive tract, the egg will continue on its journey to now kind of hang out in the uterus, which is the next thing we're going to label, until menstruation. So here is the uterus. This is the place where the baby grows. But I'm going to color it red because, and here, we're going to color this one a little bit differently because, so what happens every month? The uterus is the place where the growing embryo would be nourished. So what happens in the uterus is that the walls become thick with endometrium each month, right? So they're nice and thick and spongy. And if sperm fertilizes the egg, those thick, spongy walls will make a great site for implantation of the zygote. But if there is no fertilization occurring, oh, we didn't write the ovaries, my bad. We talked about them enough, the ovaries. But if implantation does not occur, there is no zygote to be buried in there. The reason I colored this red, this is where menstrual blood is produced, right? It's not really blood, it's endometrium. And it will be released if no pregnancy occurs. So again, that in the uterus, we have the production of endometrium, which is, this is my analogy, okay? So every month, your uterus gets very excited. There's going to be a new baby. So she's building the nursery, she's setting up the crib, she's hanging the mobile, she's got the toys, she's very excited, she's nesting. Then she finds out that there's not going to be any baby. She's hysterical, she freaks out, she tears everything off the walls, takes everything out of the crib, and throws it out. And that is menstruation. So that is the uterus. Now, if a pregnancy occurs, we're going to talk a lot more about what happens there in the coming days of female reproduction. So now, as the menstrual fluid or the baby is passing out, there's this sort of little like wall here. And here, let's make that a different color. You can see like a tighter little area, a smaller area that can't be breached during intercourse, but that is what dilates during birth. So if you've ever like seen on a television show or a movie, or even perhaps someone that you know that was giving birth, and they say that like, oh, she's dilated 10 centimeters, this is what dilates, and that is called the cervix. And the cervix is the barrier between the vagina and the uterus. And now, very commonly, that word vagina will be used to describe like what's on the outside anatomy, but that's actually called the vulva. The vagina is the birth canal. Right, where the baby actually passes through during birth and where intercourse occurs. So that is the vagina, sometimes referred to as the birth canal. And then the exterior anatomy is the vulva, right? What you can see on the outside. And that is the female reproductive system anatomy. And the egg, if fertilization does not occur, will be released along with the endometrium in menstruation. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about female hormones, estrogen and progesterone. Estrogen and progesterone are the primary sex hormones for females. Both are produced in the ovaries and are responsible for female secondary sex characteristics and initiation and maintenance of the menstrual cycle. Estrogen builds the endometrium and progesterone maintains it. Endometrium is the thick lining that forms every month in preparation for a fertilized egg. So what is the role of estrogen? Estrogen is the primary female sex hormone. And we'll talk a lot more about the female hormones in the coming days. So those of you who may have taken living environment before, you know it can get a little confusing. It regulates the menstrual cycle, ovulation, it builds the endometrium, and it regulates the development of female typical secondary sex characteristics, which include the development of breasts, the widening of the hips, and less muscle development than in males, which testosterone increases the density of your muscles. So it regulates menstrual cycle and secondary sex characteristics. Because again, just like the testes in the male reproductive system, the ovaries are also a gland in the endocrine system. Can you hear my cat crying? We're almost done, kitty. All right, define endometrium. So we can see here the endometrium is a thick lining that forms every month in preparation for a fertilized egg. So a thick lining that forms in the uterus. And if you've ever heard of the condition endometriosis, what happens in endometriosis is you have overdevelopment of the endometrium. So the endometrium fills up the entire uterus, which is kind of what it's supposed to do, but not really. It's really supposed to just form on the walls. And then the endometrium can also grow like over here on the ovaries, on the side of the fallopian tube, so outside of the uterus, even sometimes on your other organs, along the bladder, along your kidneys. And then you still have your hormonal regulation. So when you menstruate, when the endometrium is released through the vagina, which, you know, happens over like 3 to 7 days and is a typical process that happens to most women and girls after puberty, when you have this condition called endometriosis, all of that other endometrium is still released, but it has nowhere to go. So it's inside of the body cavity. This can cause a tremendous amount of pain. And this is a condition that is really being studied right now when it has never been studied before in history, probably due to misogyny. But it is a condition that impacts like the health and well-being of many women that have it. So the more you know. So the thick lining that forms every month in preparation for a fertilized egg. All right, so that's where we're going to leave it today. Let's go ahead and go up and look at those hypothesis questions. So before you do your exit ticket, at what age can females no longer become pregnant? This age is called menopause. And that is when the menstruation stops, menopause. And this is approximately 45 to 55 years old. Somewhere in that window, although it can vary. You know, some women can experience menopause a little bit younger, some women a little bit older than that, but that's standard. What age can males no longer father children? Well, as we discussed, those male gametes, they're being produced all the time. So there's really none, like 80 years old. But men have fathered children into their 80s, and really, death. What does happen is testosterone production reduces with age. But men have really sperm production until they die. Unless they have some kind of major health problem, or they have, like, for example, testicular cancer, which requires the removal of the testes, they will keep producing testosterone until death. Now, there is some evidence that older men may have increased probability of birth defects in their sperm cells, but not as much documented evidence as there is with females' egg cells. And let's talk about why. So why do the probability of birth defects increase with maternal age? Well, this is because you live with all of your sperms, or excuse me, with all of your egg cells your entire life. So everything that has happened in your entire life is happening to your egg cells. Exposure to pollution, exposure to things like radiation, exposure to unhealthy food, chemicals that are dangerous, things like drinking alcohol, doing drugs, smoking. All of these things impact all of the eggs inside of your body. And that impact is exponential, right? So each month when an egg matures and it is released, that is the best egg that your body can send forward at that time, right? Your body is performing a calculation here. It's like picking a team in sports. It's sending out its best one. As you continue to age, right? And menstruation usually begins around 11 to 13 years old. By the time you're 35, you have released 12 eggs a year for, let's say, 20 years at that point, maybe even more, 23 years. You have now your less viable eggs, the ones that are less healthy, that are more likely to have mutations, that are more likely to not be healthy. And this is because Females are born with all the eggs we're ever going to have. And environmental hazards viability of eggs. So this is why you may have heard things like, after 35, women can no longer have children, and many doctors will refer to a pregnancy after the age of 35 as a geriatric pregnancy. And geriatric means like very elderly, right? We usually refer to people in like their 80s as geriatric. The good news about this is even though your probability of birth defect increases beginning at about age 35, many women, we're talking millions of women throughout history, have had healthy pregnancies with healthy children after the age of 35. And when we look at all of human history, women used to have many, many more kids in their lifetime. And even though they would have their first child in their early 20s, women had second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, 12th children into their 40s without much incident throughout much of human history. So don't believe the hype about that one, but it is an increase in the probability of birth defects. But yeah. That topic is a little misogynistic, but we'll leave it here. So, all right, today we talked about how does the anatomy of the female reproductive system allow for reproduction. We did a little review on the male reproductive system. You guys made some hypotheses about female reproduction. We read a bit about egg production and the egg's path. We learned about the female hormones, and we labeled this diagram of female reproductive anatomy. So that's all I have for you today, guys. I hope you have a super fantastic day, and I'll see you all on Zoom tomorrow. Hi, guys.